one of the most popular functions in Excel is actually the VLookup function, or the HLookup, which is the horizontal, or excuse me, the vertical lookup or the horizontal lookup. I think the more popular of the two is the vertical lookup, which is where essentially you tell it that you want to look up something, and the lookup value in this case, let's do A6S98. So we're going to look up a product in this table. So A6S98. And that's what we're looking up. And the table array that we're looking up, let's just drag this entire range right here for now, comma. And then it says, what index do you want to know? So we're looking up column 1, but maybe we want to return the annual revenue, which is in 1, 2, 3, 4, the fourth column of this particular table, comma, and then I'm not going to get into the approximate versus exact, but just know that 0 or false is going to look up something like text a lot easier, and if you want to look up ranges of data and like using numbers, you might want to use true or 1, which is an approximate match. But in this case, I am looking up an exact string of text. So in this case, I just looked up, so let's see if that's correct. A6S98, okay, that's right. And then we wanted to go 1, 2, 3, the fourth column, 179, 741. Well, it looks like it looked that up just fine. Right, so that's the VLookup. Of course, you could Control-Shift-S, or excuse me, Control-Shift$, and you could format this very easily to return that in the format of a dollar, but it doesn't really matter what it looks like. Essentially, the lookup worked just fine. And then that's a vertical lookup, where it's going vertically to look up along whichever row that you want. And then HLookup is a horizontal lookup, so it's actually looking across the columns, and once it finds the right column, then it returns whichever number of rows you want to go downward to return. But again, it's more common to use rows to store your data and for it to look up that way. But that's VLookup versus HLookup. Now, all that to say, this video is more about the VLookup and HLookup using Visual Basic. And also, if you get more advanced into this stuff, you might want to learn how to use match with index. But for this tutorial, we're just going to show you some common pitfalls when using VLookup. So get your notepad open and let's take notes, okay? Anyway, so here we go. VLookup test is the macro that we're going to be working on here. And we're going to use that same table. In fact, it's going to be a lot easier if we name that range. I'm going to show you how to do it without naming it first. And then we'll name it, which I'll show you that's a lot easier. So first we're going to take our lookup val. So we'll just do C value. And we're going to make that equal to, let's use a different one. Let's use this one down near the bottom, like 2FD1C. So we're going to say 2FD1C. Okay, that is Ish is the person with that one. Where are we at? So here we go. There's the lookup value, right? So then we're going to say let's get the lead name. My lead name equals, and you remember, if we're going to use a worksheet function, typically we're going to type application dot worksheet function dot, and we're going to take VLookup in this case. So let's open parentheses. Now, as you may recall, the first argument was actually, what are we looking up? Can you tell me what I would put in the lookup value? Yeah, that's right. We made it into a variable, C val. We did it right over here. So that way it's going to contain 2FD1C in this case. Okay, comma. The next thing for a VLookup is, what is the table? And that is the part that is kind of tricky, or could become tricky. And I'll show you some gotchas and how we can resolve them in just a second. In this case, we'll go ahead and do it the easy way. Now, I've gone ahead and named the vendors sheet. I've given it that code name of vendors as well as the normal sheet name. So we could actually just refer to it as vendors dot, and then we could just use the range. So vendors dot range, and in our quotes we'll put, let's see, A2 through, I think it's E or F. Let's do F20. It doesn't really matter, as long if it goes too many columns, it's really not a problem to have too many columns represented. Too few, you could get an error if you're trying to look that up. So that's our range, comma. Now, which column do we want to look up if we want to get the lead name? That's right. If you said 2, yeah, because this is column 1 of our range and this is column 2. So to get the lead name, we need to put 2 here, comma, and then we do want to use a 0 or the word false, because that is an exact match instead of an approximate match, which would be true or 1 if we wanted approximate. So let's try this out. Spoiler alert, this is not going to have any errors the first time through. So cval, if I hit F8 a few times, cval is equal to 2fd1c. That looks pretty good. So that's what we're looking up. That's the table we're looking it up in. And we're going to column 2 and 0, which is an exact match. If I hit F8, my lead name is Boo. So let's see, 2fd1c, 2fd1c. Ah, the name is Boo. Oh, very good. I thought we were looking at this one with Ish. Boo. Okay, good. So if we did, so that's the lead name for that lookup. And so that's fantastic. Now let me show you a couple things that could happen that will throw you off. Let's say we open up another workbook. So here's another workbook that comes up, right? And if we hit Alt F11 and we're still in the same macro, we could rerun it from the start. It doesn't matter. Let's just go up here and let's say, now what if the other workbook also had a sheet with a code name of vendors? Well, that's not very likely, right? But if it did, we could run into problems. Let me show you another scenario that we could run into problems. If we just use the sheets and we said vendors, if we use the sheet object, sheets, excuse me, and then we said vendors, let's see what happens there. Let's hit F8. Aha! The subscript is out of range. Well, that's interesting. So why are we getting that error? Yeah, so if you said the reason we're getting that error, Dan, is because it doesn't know which workbook you're talking about. It thinks that it's the active workbook. You have 2 workbooks open, you silly red-headed man. What are you doing? So if you hit debug, let's analyze this for a second. The active workbook that I have open is actually this book 2. It's not the one that actually has a sheet called vendors. So if we wanted to be explicit and we wanted to access the sheet called vendors, even though that is in a different workbook, not the active workbook, but a different one, we might say this workbook dot sheets. And the reason we say this workbook is because this code is originating from the other workbook, the one that we actually care about a whole bunch. And so the phrase this workbook would tell it that, hey, anything beyond this dot is representative of the originating workbook, the workbook where all the code is coming from, the source, right? So that tells it to look in the other workbook and go ahead and find the sheet called vendors. And then if you hit F8, then your lookup is going to be just fine. You see how it actually gave me the name Boo this time and no errors. So that's another thing that you could do, is use this workbook.sheets if you want to go that route and not use the code name, but the actual sheet name that's down here in the tabs. That's another thing. One other gotcha is, what do you do if there is not any result in your database? So let me close this extra workbook that's not even relevant really quick, and let me show you what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, let's say, okay, yeah, all these vendor IDs are, they're 5-digit random codes that I made up. Well, what if we did something like this? Bananas. That's what we're going to look up. That must be the correct vendor ID for something. Let's see what it returns. Well, so that's going to be a problem, you see, because there is no result. There's no vendor ID that is bananas, I happen to know, because I made all these vendor IDs. So if we look up bananas in this table, we're going to get an error. Now, whenever you're looking it up in a regular worksheet using equals VLookup in some cell, the errors that you get there are a little bit more kind. They don't make this annoying pop-up that demands your attention so much. So here's what we have to do, right? If we're going to do a VLookup and we're demanding the answer with an exact match, we're not going to get an exact match every single time. There might be an instance where you want to move on past that and not have a stupid error pop up. So here's what you do. And again, we go over this, how to use error catching and things like that a lot more in some of my other courses, like the Ultimate Excel Programmer course. But I'm going to show you a quick tip of how you can resolve this really quick. So we're going to say on error, resume next. Okay, that line of code tells it to go ahead and resume or keep on going to the next line of code, even though there is an error. And we'll basically deal with it in a minute, but we're not going to pause the execution of code to give a stupid error. And then later on, of course, you do want to turn error checking back on by saying on error go to 0. I don't know why in the world this is the code to turn error catching back on or whatever, but that's just how it is. So let's hit F8 and run this line again, on error resume next. And now whenever this tries to look up bananas, it does not find anything, but it also does not give a big pop-up error screen. It just simply puts empty into our variable so that we could then test further. We could very easily say, hey, if my lead name or whatever variable you use, if that variable that we were doing testing on is empty, then, and that means we didn't find a lookup, by the way, we didn't find a result, so that we could do something here, do stuff here, end if. We might do a message box that says result not found, please try again, and then wherever they're entering in whatever they're trying to look up, perhaps they type it a little different or spell it better or click on a different result or whatever, however you're programming, I don't know. But then if we go to on error go to 0, that turns on the error trapping. And just to prove it to you, I will go ahead and run this line again, and now there's that lovely pop-up that we hate so much. So yes, the error trapping is back on. So that's the main tips when you're doing a VLookup, is plan for it to fail at least at some point in time, especially if users are allowed to type whatever they want. It's going to fail. They're going to mistype something, and you don't want them to see an ugly, ugly pop-up, right? You want them to have some kind of routine that makes it gentle and easy on them to fix. That might say, no results found, or maybe it just ignores it and does not fill up the list box or the table or whatever was supposed to happen. It doesn't happen. It just clears that table or whatever. And that will tell them that, oh, there's no results. Maybe I should try spelling this correctly or whatever. So anyway, be gentle to your users. Be thoughtful about the errors they might encounter so that we can make sure and not let them have such a bad experience. We will see you in the next lecture.